Imagine this. You've just been told by your boss that you have to put together and present something to the top executives in your company. Your boss expects you to nail it, but you've never spoken to the CEO or the chief commercial officer before. Or imagine that you've just been reorganized and now instead of reporting to some random director, you're reporting directly to a member of the executive leadership team. How do you work with that person? What do you say? What don't you say? What do you bring to them and what don't you bring to them? There's a lot of mysticism about what it means to be an executive and how to work with them. But at the core, there's some basic principles that underlie what's important to a good executive. And these principles are what you need to know so you can shape the way you work with them. I'm Mike. I've got a background from 25 years in consulting, pharma, and tech. I've held C-level roles in international companies. I have degrees in business, human resources, and psychology. On this channel, I analyze why companies do the things they do, and I provide advice on navigating the corporate world. Today is about how you work with executives. Let's get stuck in. Picture this. You're out hiking in the wilderness of Yellowstone. All around you, you're surrounded by cliff walls, trees, lakes. You're down among the trees. You're crossing rivers. You're navigating the narrow passes along the cliffs. Now, where's the CEO? The CEO is sitting in a fire marshal's watchtower with a view above the tree line. If I were using a ship analogy, you'd be down in the engine room and the CEO would be the captain on the deck, looking out over the ocean and looking on the maps. So I'm going to ask you a question. What is the fire marshal looking for? They're looking for signs of smoke, because smoke is danger. Smoke is something that needs to be dealt with. The same goes for the ship's captain. Whenever you walk into a meeting with an executive, this is a key to how they approach what you bring to them. Their job isn't necessarily to understand the subject matter of whatever you're presenting. What they're looking for is reasonable confidence that whatever you do is not going to start a wildfire. And if you, in the presentation, make them nervous, if you make them fear the risk of smoke and the possibility of fire, they're going to pick up the binoculars and take a closer look because their worry is the health of the forest. As a ship's captain, their concern is how what you're telling them relates to getting the ship to its destination. And you'll recognize this. You're presenting something, a simple status update, and down on page 3, there's a bullet about something that some EVP latches onto, and suddenly you're talking about nitty-gritty details of a relatively simple project. This isn't because the meeting has derailed. This isn't because they're micromanagers. This is because something you wrote on the slide or something you said led them to believe that there's something out there that could turn into a fire, and they're trying to understand more. These are often the most demoralizing presentations where you leave and you feel you ended up talking about some random detail that to you was minor. What more often than not happened is them spotting something that made them nervous and they decided to dig deeper. When they dig deeper, those meetings can get very tough because they are essentially turning it into a test of your capability to avoid a fire and a test of their trust in you. If they're nervous, they're going to get involved. And what you need to do is whenever you present or share something with a boss is to make sure that it's presented in a way that they have confidence that it won't turn into a fire. And barring that, if it is a fire, your job is to give them the confidence that you can handle the flame. For them, what you're talking about has to be contextualized to the direction of the company or the impact on the company. What you need to do now is take an executive decision. You can see the future ahead and you know that this channel is going to benefit you. So click the subscribe button now. Thanks a ton. Next image. This time, your executive is a lifeguard on the beach. They are still scanning the beach and the ocean for signs of danger. Sharks, swimmers going out too far, rowdy teenagers, that kind of stuff. What don't you want to do with that lifeguard? Well, you don't want to distract the lifeguard with unimportant things. You chit-chatting about the lack of good parking is going to take the lifeguard's eyes off of the ocean. You asking where you can buy ice cream is also not something you should be wasting their time with. But you can bring up the fact that a group of boys are throwing their cigarette butts in the sand and you're worried that someone will step on them and burn their feet. With the executive, this overview of the business or the business unit is one of the core components of their job. And they need people that only bring to them something that the executive either needs to know or needs to do something about. If you bring up a topic that isn't important, you're risking two things. One is worse than the other. The smallest problem is that you're wasting their time. The bigger problem is that you get them involved, and when the executive gets involved, they are likely to take charge and make decisions, which might not always be a good thing. Just try and go to an executive and ask them what their opinion is on vending machines in the office. Trust me, some of them will suddenly be involved. You thought you would just bounce off whether or not there should be Pepsi or Coca-Cola in the vending machines, and that morphed into a business case, a broader analysis of the benefits package for employees, and also, what's up with people expensing so much takeout? That's the kind of questions that show up. Bring only what needs to be escalated and what needs to land on their desk. King Solomon was an executive. When two women showed up claiming to both be mothers to a baby, his solution was to cut the baby in half. This story illustrates two sides of the way an executive thinks. First of all, if forced to make a decision, the executive will make a decision. Second, the higher up you go, the more considerations need to be taken into account. So more often than not, there's no right answer. There's only compromise. When you're relatively new to a job, you think that there should be clear rules and policies that lead to fairness and consistency. And as a general rule, that's usually the right approach. But to get a big company to work, you need everybody to more or less get along. You get along through helping each other out, seeing multiple sides of an issue, and by compromising. And the fact is, the CEO likely knows things you don't know, which goes into those considerations. So here's an example. An employee applies for a job internally. He or she wants to move out of their current team and into an open position in another team under a different manager. The internal policy at the company is that employees are free to switch jobs as they wish and no manager can hinder the transition. So the employee applies and gets offered the job. But when the employee tells their current manager, all hell breaks loose because this employee is on a critical project. The current manager sees their goals not being hit, colleagues calling in sick, budget overruns. They scream to their boss, who screams to their boss, and this ends up as a fight between two executives representing the employee's current team and the future team. What you have now is one employee who has a right, as it were, to change jobs. You've got a hugely business-critical project that's in trouble potentially because of the shift. And you've got two executives at each other's throats because they're fighting over an employee. That's a fight that's going to affect the boardroom dynamics. So what does the CEO do? Well, if they're smart, they find a compromise. The employee gets to transfer, but not immediately. The shift is done over 6 months, something like that. The employee might hate it, but in the scheme of the company, this is the compromise that ensures business continuity, more or less compliance to the internal mobility policy, keeps the management team functional and non-oppositional. It's compromise. It's nuance. George Bush once described himself as the decider, the guy who listened to everybody else and then made a decision. And that is to some extent the CEO's job, but not really. A CEO is only as effective as their team. If they aren't aligned on priorities, the company will get nothing done. The board of directors is more often than not a version of the Roman Senate. Caesar could rarely just make a decision. The decision was subject to deliberation and debate, and that debate was there to ensure that there was support for whatever decision was made once the senators left the room and the things were set in motion to deliver. What that means for you is, just because you've gotten approval from your own executive on some idea or initiative or approach, that idea is going to get nowhere unless there are at least some other executives that support the approach. This means a couple of things. Never, ever walk into a room expecting a go decision based on something people have never seen before. If this is the first time someone sees something, most of the time, the outcome is going to be a no. 2, part of your job or your executive's jobs is shopping around for buy-in. If you're in product development and have come up with a new cool product, you need the engineers in production to buy in and believe that it's possible for them to build the thing without too much hassle. And you need to give the marketing guy time to think through how they would position this product in their marketing. If you just walk into the room and present your genius idea without them being involved, heard, or pre-informed, they're going to shoot you down. The Japanese have a term for this. It's called nemawashi, which translates more or less to washing the roots. And it's the process of stakeholder management, getting implicit acceptance and clearing away obstacles. And this is at the core of how all executives usually think. Is there support? Will it fly? Who will be against? This is why even the choice of singer for the annual Christmas party ends up in the board, because there's one executive who's going to whine and moan and complain if they weren't asked, and the others don't want that. So you have to do stakeholder management just to figure out whether or not Bruno Mars is acceptable to everybody. If you highlight the smoke in the woods, also highlight that you've got it under control. The fire marshal doesn't want to have to climb down from their watchtower, so flagging the smoke but also showing to them that you have it under control will keep them happy. This translates in real-world terms to always coming with solutions, not questions, and always starting with a solution, or at least ensuring that there is a solution. You'll see a ton of these guides online about how to structure a presentation for a CEO, and it applies for other actions as well, including simple meetings. Get to the solution quickly. Frame the problem as something that's under control, and from there you can build a case on how you're controlling it. More often than not, it's some version of what are we here to talk about and why it's important, the solution, and how we concluded the solution was the right one. The fire marshal wants to avoid the forest burning to the ground. The captain wants the ship not to sink and ideally get to its destination. Those are their goals. Those are the business goals. Whatever you're bringing to them should ideally be in the context of business impact. The passengers on the boat might like to see dolphins, but the CEO doesn't care. They want to know if they're on course and if there are any icebergs ahead. When you bring something to them, it needs to be framed in the context of the business impact and the business priorities. A remodel of the office might be cheap, but the business impact might be that everybody needs to work from home for 6 weeks and production might be impacted. Changing those vending machines might be a teeny tiny small thing, but if the last time you changed machines, the unions called a strike, well, then that teeny tiny thing isn't as unimportant as you thought. The executive shouldn't be caring about the task itself, but should be caring about the business impact, and that should always be the way you're thinking when bringing them something. There are tons of guides that tell you to be punctual and deliver on time and deliver high quality. They tell you to anticipate the executive's needs and to build trust. All of that is correct, but it's not like it's unique to working with an executive. The key distinction is boiled down to that image of the captain on the deck or the fire marshal in the lookout tower or the lifeguard on the beach. Their job is to have a view that sees further. Their job, like the captain, is to chart a course based on the information they have available. And their job is to make decisions based on the good news, the bad news, the smoke, the tides of the water, to guide their ship to wherever they're going. If you're in the engine room, what they need to know is the things that will meaningfully affect the course of the journey. Is the engine failing? Are you running out of coal? Does the captain need to send someone down to help you, or do you have everything under control? If you see an iceberg, you need to flag it. If you see a single dolphin, you probably don't. The reality is that the key to understanding an executive is that they have a broader view than you have. They see things that you don't. They have to take more things into account than you do, and they have to chart a path for the boat based on the information that they have. Now, this is good news and bad news for you, because initially you're going to fail. You are in the engine room, and in the engine room, the problems you have are the biggest in the world for you. They are massively important to you. You're also just the guy walking in the forest. When you see a bear, it's a big thing for you. It's hugely consequential for you, but it might not be for the fire marshal. Because you don't have the view, because you don't have all the information, you will inevitably, in the beginning, be bringing things to the table of the executive that don't need to go there. You'll flag problems that aren't problems, and that will distract your executive, and they'll maybe get frustrated with you. But it's also a great way to learn, because talking to the captain gives you a perspective in a way that talking to the engine room chief doesn't. Working with the executive forces you to think like an executive. It's the reason that chief of staff roles and strategy director roles are often so coveted. They give you a glimpse of what it means to be an executive and trains you to one day become one. So take heart. Think of your executive as that fire marshal, that lifeguard, or that cruise ship captain. Do your best to envision what they would see and what would be important when you had that kind of view. When you start tailoring your interaction to that perspective, that's when you'll start nailing your relationship with the executive. Share your insights into working with an executive in the comments. What works for you, what doesn't. Remember to subscribe. See you soon.